I was standing in my kitchen, holding the phone with hands that had been steady through 40 years of corporate negotiations, when my son David said those 5 words that would shatter my world. "It's just a dinner, Mom." His voice carried that dismissive tone I had been hearing more and more lately, the one that made me feel like an inconvenience in the life I had spent decades building for him. Can you imagine preparing for what you believed was the most important moment in your son's life, only to discover you were never meant to be part of it? What would you do if your own child looked you straight in the eye and made you feel invisible? I stood there in silence, but I already knew that within the next hour, my response would forever change the dynamics of our family. What they didn't know was that this 60-year-old woman they were dismissing had resources they had completely underestimated. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Margaret Harrison. I'm 62 years old, and until 5 years ago, I was the chief financial officer of Harrison & Associates, the investment firm I built from the ground up with my late husband, Robert. When he passed, I stepped back from daily operations, but retained controlling shares worth approximately $8 million. I raised David as a single mother after Robert's death, sacrificing countless opportunities to ensure he had everything he needed to succeed. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I had been planning for weeks what I thought would be David's engagement announcement dinner. He had mentioned bringing Jessica home for a special dinner and asked me to make it nice. Naturally, I assumed this was the moment he would propose to the woman he had been dating for 2 years. I had already booked flights to Paris for a celebration trip, reserved the presidential suite at the George V Hotel for a week, and planned a shopping spree on the Champs-Élysées. $60,000 invested in what I believed would be one of the most precious memories we would share as a family. "Mom, I need to tell you something," David had said, his voice strangely flat. "About tonight's dinner." "Of course, darling. I have everything prepared. The champagne is chilled, I've made reservations at Le Bernardin for tomorrow to celebrate properly, and I cannot wait to welcome Jessica officially into our family." There was a pause, a long, uncomfortable pause that should have warned me. "Actually, Mom, you don't need to do anything special. It's just a dinner, just normal food. Jessica's parents will be there, and we want to keep it simple." "Her parents?" I felt a strange chill run down my spine. "David, why would her parents be here if you're just having a casual dinner?" Another pause, this one even longer. "Look, Mom, I didn't want to make a big deal out of this. Yes, I'm going to propose tonight, but we wanted something intimate, just immediate family. Jessica's parents flew in from Seattle, and we thought it would be better to keep it contained." The word contained hit me like a physical blow. Contained. As if my presence would somehow contaminate their perfect moment. "I see," I said, my voice maintaining the professional calm I had perfected in boardrooms full of men who underestimated women like me. "So you're telling me that you're proposing to Jessica tonight, her parents are here, and you decided not to inform me until the day of the event because you wanted to keep it contained. Mom, don't make this dramatic. It's just a dinner. We'll have a bigger celebration later, okay? With everyone. Just a dinner." The words echoed in my mind as I looked around the kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals for this child, where I had helped him with homework, where I had held him when he cried over his father's death. Just a dinner. "David," I said, my voice still controlled, "I want you to understand something very clearly. I have already made arrangements. Expensive arrangements. I was planning to take us all to Paris to celebrate your engagement properly." "Paris? Mom, we didn't ask for that. Look, we appreciate everything you do, but Jessica and I are adults. We make our own decisions about how we want to celebrate our milestones. Our milestones. Not family milestones, their milestones." It was in that moment that something fundamental shifted inside me. For 28 years, I had been David's mother, supporter, financier, and biggest advocate. I had paid for his private school education, his college tuition at Columbia, his law school at Harvard, and even helped him with the down payment on his Manhattan apartment. When he started his career, I used my connections to get him interviews at the most prestigious law firms in the city. But apparently, when it came to the most important moments of his adult life, I was just an afterthought to be managed and contained. "I understand perfectly, David," I said, my voice taking on the tone I used to use when closing deals worth millions. Have a lovely dinner with Jessica's parents. I hope it's everything you dreamed it would be." I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen for exactly 30 seconds, processing the full magnitude of what had just happened. Then I picked up my phone again and made the first call that would begin my transformation from dismissed mother to force to be reckoned with. "Hello, American Express Platinum Concierge? Yes, this is Margaret Harrison, account number ending in 4791. I need to cancel some travel arrangements and book something else immediately. Money is no object." What my son didn't know as he prepared for his intimate dinner was that his mother had just decided to have her own celebration. And unlike his contained little gathering, mine was going to be spectacular, public, and absolutely unforgettable. Within 20 minutes, I had canceled the Paris arrangements, booked a first-class ticket to Rome departing that very evening, and reserved the penthouse suite at the Hôtel de Russie overlooking the Spanish Steps. The same $60,000 that was meant to celebrate his engagement would now fund my own personal renaissance. As I packed my Louis Vuitton suitcase with the efficiency of someone who had traveled the world closing international deals, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the thrill of taking control. David wanted to exclude me from his milestone? Fine. I would create my own milestone, and it would be magnificent. But what happened next, as I sat in that first-class seat 35,000 feet above the Atlantic, sipping champagne and planning my Roman holiday, would turn this personal act of defiance into something that would shake my family to its very foundation. Because sometimes, when you underestimate a woman who has built empires, you discover that her capacity for strategy extends far beyond anything you could have imagined. The Alitalia first-class cabin felt like a sanctuary as I settled into seat 2A, my phone buzzing incessantly with messages I had no intention of answering. David had discovered my absence when he arrived home to find my note on the kitchen counter. "Gone to celebrate milestones. Enjoy your intimate dinner. Mother." As Rome appeared through the aircraft window 12 hours later, golden and eternal in the morning sun, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Robert's death: complete freedom. The Hôtel de Russie's penthouse suite was everything I had hoped for: marble floors, frescoed ceilings, and a private terrace overlooking the Spanish Steps where Audrey Hepburn had once walked in Roman holiday. But it wasn't until I was standing on that terrace, wearing my vintage Hermes scarf and holding a glass of Brunello di Montalcino, that the real inspiration struck me. If David wanted to exclude me from his announcement, perhaps it was time for me to make an announcement of my own. I positioned my phone carefully, making sure the iconic Roman skyline was perfectly framed behind me. The Spanish Steps cascaded below, tourists dotting the ancient stones like confetti. I looked radiant, 62 years old, and absolutely glowing with the confidence of a woman who had just reclaimed her power. "Sometimes the best celebrations are the ones you plan for yourself," I captioned the photo, adding my location and the simple hashtag, "Mart living my best life." Within minutes of posting, my phone exploded. The first call came from David at 6:15 in the morning, New York time. I could practically hear the panic in his voice through the voicemail. "Mom, what the hell are you doing in Rome? We need to talk immediately. Call me back." The second call came from Jessica, sweet Jessica, who had probably been horrified to discover that her future mother-in-law had fled the country rather than attend their engagement dinner. Her message was softer, but equally concerned. "Mrs. Harrison, we're worried about you. David is beside himself. Please call us back so we know you're safe." But it was the third call that truly revealed the magnitude of what my simple selfie had unleashed. It came from David's sister-in-law, Karen, and her message was illuminating. "Margaret, David called my mother at midnight asking if we knew where you were. He's telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown and disappeared. You need to control this narrative before it gets out of hand." Control the narrative. How interesting. So David was already spinning this as his poor, unstable mother having an emotional crisis rather than acknowledging that he had excluded me from one of the most important moments of his life. I sat on my Roman terrace, sipping espresso and watching the city wake up, and realized that my son had made a crucial miscalculation. He had forgotten that I didn't just survive in corporate boardrooms for 4 decades by accident. I had built a reputation on strategic thinking, and right now, his panic was giving me all the information I needed about his true priorities. My phone buzzed with a text from my longtime assistant, Patricia, who still handled some of my personal affairs. "Mrs. H, David called the office looking for you. Very agitated. Says there's a family emergency. Should I give him your hotel information?" I typed back quickly. "Absolutely not. If anyone asks, tell them I'm taking some well-deserved personal time and will return when I'm ready." The beauty of Rome was working its magic on me. But more than that, the distance was providing clarity I hadn't had in years. As I reviewed the flood of messages, missed calls, and increasingly frantic voicemails, a pattern emerged that was both revealing and deeply troubling. Not one person, not David, not Jessica, not any of the family members who were suddenly so concerned about my whereabouts, had acknowledged the fundamental issue that I had been deliberately excluded from my son's engagement. Instead, they were treating my response as irrational, emotional, something to be managed rather than understood. David's fourth voicemail was particularly telling. "Mom, I don't know what kind of statement you're trying to make, but you're embarrassing yourself and Jessica. Her parents think you're having some kind of mental health crisis. You need to come home, and we need to sit down and have a rational conversation about your behavior." My behavior, not his decision to exclude me. My behavior in response to being excluded. As I walked through the Villa Borghese that afternoon, surrounded by centuries of art and history, I began to understand that this moment was bigger than just a missed dinner. This was about a pattern I had been too loving, too hopeful, and perhaps too naive to recognize. When David graduated from Harvard Law, I wasn't invited to the celebration dinner with his classmates. It was just for the graduates. When he got his first major case win, I learned about it from LinkedIn, not from him directly. When he moved in with Jessica, I discovered it when I tried to send flowers to his old apartment, and they were returned. Each time, I had rationalized his behavior. He was busy, he was establishing his independence, he was building his career. But standing in the Galleria Borghese, looking at Bernini's sculpture of Apollo and Daphne, the moment of transformation frozen in marble, I realized I had been enabling a pattern of exclusion that had been growing for years. My phone rang. David again. This time I answered. "Hello, darling." "Mom, thank God. Where are you? What are you doing? Everyone is worried sick." "I'm in Rome, David, looking at some of the most beautiful art in the world and having a wonderful time." "Rome? Mom, you can't just disappear to Europe without telling anyone. What if something happened to you? What if there was an emergency? Like your engagement?" I asked quietly. Silence. "That's different, Mom. We wanted to keep it small. Small enough to include Jessica's parents who flew in from Seattle, but too small to include the woman who raised you? Mom, please don't make this about you. This is supposed to be about Jessica and me." And there it was. The phrase that crystallized everything. Don't make this about you. As if a mother celebrating her son's engagement was somehow selfish. As if wanting to be included in the milestones of the child you raised was inappropriate. As if my love and investment in his life was something to be minimized rather than honored. "You're absolutely right, David," I said, watching the Roman sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "This is about you and Jessica, which is why I decided to make something about me for once. I'm going to stay in Rome for a while and think about some things." "How long is a while?" "I'm not sure yet. I'm thinking of extending my trip, maybe visiting Florence, perhaps spending some time in Tuscany. I haven't had a proper vacation since your father died." "Mom, you can't just run away from family responsibilities." Family responsibilities. The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. "What responsibilities would those be, David? Since I apparently don't have any role in your major life events, what exactly am I responsible for?" Another long silence. "Look, I'll call you tomorrow when you've had time to calm down." After he hung up, I sat on my terrace as Rome sparkled below me, and I began to plan. Not just the rest of my Italian adventure, but something much more significant. Because David's phone call had revealed something crucial. He still didn't understand what he had done wrong. He saw this as my overreaction, not his exclusion, which meant this pattern would continue unless I did something to fundamentally change it. I opened my laptop and began researching something I never thought I would need. Family lawyers who specialized in estate planning and inheritance structures. Because if David saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed, perhaps it was time for him to learn exactly how much he had taken for granted. The next morning, I would make a call that would begin the most strategic campaign of my life. But that night, I simply enjoyed being Margaret Harrison again. Not David's mother, not Robert's widow, but a woman with her own power, her own resources, and her own plans. The selfie I posted before bed showed me raising a glass of champagne on my terrace, the lights of Rome twinkling behind me. The caption was simple: Day 2 of my Roman holiday. Tomorrow, Florence beckons. New chapter, just living for me. What I didn't mention was that I had just made reservations to extend my stay for 3 more weeks and booked appointments with some very interesting people who would help me ensure that David would never again have the luxury of taking his mother for granted. The train from Rome to Florence gave me 2 hours to think, and by the time we pulled into Santa Maria Novella station, I had made 3 decisions that would change everything. First, I was going to stay in Italy for a full month. Second, I was going to use this time to conduct some very thorough research. And third, I was going to document every moment of this journey in a way that would make it impossible for anyone to dismiss as a breakdown. The Four Seasons Hotel Firenze was everything I had hoped for. A Renaissance palazzo converted into pure luxury, with gardens that made you believe in the possibility of second chances. But it wasn't the marble statues or frescoed ceilings that gave me the most satisfaction. It was the phone call I made from my suite overlooking the Arno River. "Patricia, it's Margaret. I need you to do something for me." "Mrs. Harrison, thank goodness. David has called 6 times today. He's very concerned." "I'm sure he is, but I need you to research something for me. I want a complete financial analysis of every investment, gift, and loan I've made to David over the past 10 years. Every tuition payment, every apartment down payment, every professional connection I facilitated. I want numbers, dates, and documentation." There was a pause. Patricia had been my assistant for 15 years, and she knew me well enough to understand when I was operating in strategic mode. "Should I ask why, Mrs. Harrison?" "Let's just say I'm conducting a comprehensive review of my family investment portfolio. And Patricia, I also need you to research estate lawyers in New York, the best ones. I want to understand all my options regarding inheritance planning and family trusts." After I hung up, I walked out onto my terrace and posted another photo, this time of the Ponte Vecchio at sunset, with me looking contemplative and serene. The caption read, "Florence reminds you that beauty endures through centuries of change. Sometimes we need distance to see clearly. Perspective. Florence Chuck Soul Food." Within an hour, David called. "Mom, we need to talk about when you're coming home." "I'm not ready to come home yet, David. Florence is extraordinary, and I'm learning so much about myself." "Learning what exactly?" "Mom, you're acting like a teenager. This whole Instagram travel blog thing is embarrassing." Instagram travel blog. That's how he saw my documentation of this journey, as something embarrassing rather than empowering. "I'm sharing beautiful moments from a beautiful city. I'm 62 years old, David, not dead. I'm allowed to have experiences and share them." "But what's the point? You're just wandering around Europe posting pictures. It's not productive. Not productive. Coming from the son whose Harvard Law School education I had paid for in full." "David, can I ask you something? When you were planning your engagement dinner, at what point did you consider whether excluding me might hurt my feelings?" "Mom, we've been through this. It wasn't about excluding you. It was about keeping things simple." "Simple for whom? Because it seems to me that flying Jessica's parents in from Seattle and coordinating multiple families is actually quite complex. The only thing that would have been simplified was my absence. That's not—" "Look, can we please just talk about this when you get back? When are you coming back?" "I'm thinking of extending my trip. Maybe visiting Tuscany. Perhaps spending some time in the wine country. I'm considering making some new friends. Maybe joining some tour groups for mature travelers." The horror in his voice was almost comical. "Tour groups? Mom, you hate groups. You've always been private about family matters. Maybe it's time I became more social." "I'm meeting the most interesting people here. Did you know there's a whole community of successful women who are reinventing themselves after major life transitions? Some are widows like me, some are divorced, some just decided to prioritize themselves for the first time in decades." This was absolutely true. The hotel concierge had connected me with an informal network of sophisticated women travelers, and their stories were both inspiring and illuminating. But more than that, I was discovering something about myself that I had forgotten during all those years of putting David first. I was interesting. I had stories, experiences, and wisdom that people wanted to hear. "What kind of reinventing?" David asked, and I could hear the worry creeping into his voice. "Oh, all sorts of things. Estate planning, charitable giving, new investment strategies. It's fascinating how many options open up when you start thinking about your legacy differently." "Your legacy?" "Well, yes. I'm 62 years old with substantial assets and no grandchildren yet. I'm starting to think about how I want to spend my remaining years and what kind of impact I want to make. Some of these women have started foundations, others have completely restructured their family trusts. It's very thought-provoking." The silence on the other end was profound. "Mom, you're not thinking of doing anything drastic, are you?" "Drastic? Like excluding your mother from your engagement dinner?" "I'm just exploring my options, darling. For instance, did you know that there are incredibly sophisticated ways to structure charitable giving that can have tremendous tax advantages while also creating meaningful legacies?" I'm learning so much. That night, Patricia emailed me a preliminary report that was more revealing than I had expected. Over the past 10 years, I had invested nearly $400,000 in David's life: education, apartment, career support, and countless smaller gifts and loans. But more than the money was the pattern of favors, connections, and opportunities I had facilitated through my professional network. I had introduced him to the managing partner at his law firm. I had vouched for him with clients who became his first major accounts. When he needed a reference for his apartment lease, I had personally guaranteed it. When he wanted to join the exclusive Metropolitan Club, I had used my connections to sponsor his membership. For 10 years, I had been not just his mother, but his most valuable professional asset. Yet when it came time to celebrate his engagement, the milestone that would launch him into the next phase of his adult life, I was too inconvenient to include. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls that would set the next phase of my plan in motion. The first was to James Morrison, the estate planning attorney Patricia had recommended, a man whose reputation for sophisticated family wealth strategies was legendary among New York's elite. "Mr. Morrison, this is Margaret Harrison. I understand you specialize in complex family trust structures and estate planning for high-net-worth individuals." "Indeed I do, Mrs. Harrison. What can I help you with?" "I'm interested in exploring options for restructuring my estate plans. I have a son who may benefit from a more educational approach to understanding family wealth and responsibility." "I see. Are we talking about incentive trusts, charitable remainder structures, or something more comprehensive?" "I'm thinking something quite comprehensive. I'd like to explore creating structures that reward family members for treating family relationships with appropriate respect and consideration." There was a pause and then a chuckle. "Mrs. Harrison, I think we should definitely meet. I have some very creative ideas for what we might call relationship accountability trusts." The second call was to my travel agent. "Sarah, it's Margaret Harrison. I want to extend my Italian stay and add some experiences. I'm thinking cooking classes in Tuscany, art history tours, maybe some wine country adventures. I want to become fluent in living well." "How wonderful, Mrs. Harrison. How long are we thinking?" "Let's plan for 6 weeks total. I want this to be thorough." That afternoon, I posted a photo of myself at the Uffizi, standing in front of Botticelli's Birth of Venus. I looked radiant, engaged, and absolutely alive. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to travel far to remember who you are beneath all the roles you play for others. Florence is teaching me that Renaissance means rebirth. Renaissance, self-discovery. Birth of Venus, new beginnings." The response was immediate. Comments poured in from friends I hadn't heard from in years, professional colleagues expressing admiration for my adventure, and women sharing their own stories of reinvention. But more telling were the messages from people in David's circle, his law school friends, work colleagues, even Jessica's sorority sisters who followed me on social media. "Your mom is living her best life," one of Jessica's friends commented. "This is so inspiring," David called that evening, and his tone had changed completely. "Mom, people are asking me questions about your trip." "What kind of questions?" "Like, why you're traveling alone for so long, whether everything is okay with our family. Jessica's mother asked if we had some kind of falling out. And what did you tell her? I told her everything was fine, that you just decided to take a vacation. Well, that's true. I did decide to take a vacation. A very long, very public, very well-documented vacation. But people are starting to talk, Mom, about why you left right after our engagement. Are they? How interesting. What are they saying? They're wondering if maybe we should have handled the engagement announcement differently. And there it was. The first crack in his certainty that he had done nothing wrong. David, I said gently, I'm not trying to embarrass you, but I'm also not going to pretend that being excluded from your engagement was acceptable just to make you more comfortable. So when are you coming home? When I'm ready. I have cooking classes in Tuscany next week, and I've met some fascinating people who are showing me aspects of Italian culture I never knew existed. This is the most alive I've felt in years. After I hung up, I smiled as I looked out at the Arno River flowing beneath the ancient bridges of Florence. David was beginning to understand that his actions had consequences, but this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, I would implement the next phase of my plan. Because while Florence was teaching me about Renaissance, it was also teaching me about strategy. And I was about to show my son that underestimating Margaret Harrison was the biggest mistake he could have made. The Villa San Michele in Fiesole was where everything crystallized. Perched high above Florence with views that stretched to infinity, it was also where I met Elena Rodriguez Chen, a woman whose story would give me the final piece of my strategy. Elena was 73, impeccably dressed, and radiated the kind of confidence that comes from having survived everything life can throw at you. We were both taking the same intensive cooking class, Tuscan Traditions for the Modern Woman, and bonding over our shared appreciation for good wine and well-executed revenge. My daughter-in-law tried to have me declared mentally incompetent 3 years ago, Elena told me, as we kneaded pasta dough in the villa's ancient kitchen. She wanted to put me in assisted living and take control of my assets. She assumed that because I was grieving my husband's death and making what she called erratic financial decisions, I was losing my faculties. What were the erratic decisions? I asked, genuinely curious. I donated $2 million to establish a scholarship fund at my late husband's university without consulting the family first. I bought a house in Santa Barbara because I wanted to live near the ocean. And I started traveling extensively, documenting every trip on social media. She smiled wickedly. Sound familiar? It sounded very familiar indeed. What did you do? I hired the best elder law attorney in California and restructured my entire estate. Created what's called a family accountability trust, with very specific performance metrics for inheritance eligibility. My children and their spouses now have to meet certain behavioral standards regarding respect, inclusion, and family communication if they want to benefit from my estate. Elena handed me her phone, showing me her Instagram account with over 50,000 followers. 3 years later, I'm more active, more engaged, and more respected by my family than I've ever been. And my daughter-in-law? She sends me flowers every birthday and includes me in every family decision. That evening, I called James Morrison from my suite at the Villa San Michele. Mr. Morrison, I've been thinking more about our conversation regarding relationship accountability trusts. I'd like to schedule a meeting for when I return to New York. Excellent. What timeline are we looking at for implementation? I'm thinking we should move quickly. I want to create a structure that incentivizes respectful family behavior while I'm still alive to enjoy the benefits, not just after I'm gone. I love clients who think strategically. I'll prepare some preliminary structures for your review. The next morning brought a call from Patricia with information that made everything click into place. Mrs. Harrison, I've completed the financial analysis you requested. The total investment in David over the past 10 years is $437,000 in direct costs, but when you factor in the opportunity costs of connections, guarantees, and professional favors, we're looking at well over $600,000 in total value provided. And what about ongoing commitments? Well, there's the Metropolitan Club membership you're guaranteeing, the apartment lease you co-signed, and you're still listed as an emergency contact and financial reference for several of his professional obligations. I see. And if I were to remove my guarantees and references, it would create some complications for him. Nothing devastating, but he would need to qualify for these things on his own merit and financial standing. Thank you, Patricia. I'll be in touch about next steps. That afternoon, I posted a photo that would become legendary in my family's history. It was me at a Tuscan vineyard, participating in the grape harvest, wearing work clothes and boots, my hands stained purple with grape juice, laughing with a group of Italian women who had welcomed me into their centuries-old tradition. The caption read, "Learning that the best wines come from grapes that have struggled through difficult seasons. The pressure creates character, depth, and value. Sometimes being pushed to your limits brings out your finest qualities. Tuscan wisdom, grape harvest, pressure creates value, finding strength." Within hours, it had more comments and likes than anything I had ever posted. But more importantly, it had been shared by someone in Jessica's family, and the comments from David's professional network were telling. "Your mother is incredible, David," his law partner had commented. "What an inspiration. Mrs. Harrison is living proof that age is just a number," wrote one of his clients. "You must be so proud," David called that evening, and I could hear something new in his voice, uncertainty. "Mom, that vineyard photo is everywhere. My senior partner shared it in our firm's newsletter as an example of embracing life at every stage. How nice of him. But Mom, people are asking me questions, personal questions, about why you're traveling alone for so long, whether I support your adventure, whether our family is close, and how do you answer those questions?" I don't know what to say. Because honestly, I'm starting to realize that I don't really know what you've been doing with your life since Dad died. I mean, I knew you traveled some, but I didn't know you were so active, adventurous. This was progress. David was beginning to see me as a person with my own life and interests, not just as his mother who existed to support his needs. "David, can I ask you something? When was the last time you asked me about my life? Not my health or whether I needed anything, but about my interests, my goals, my dreams?" The silence stretched so long, I thought we might have been disconnected. I don't know. I guess I assumed you were content with your routine. The house, your book club, your charity work. My book club meets once a month, and my charity work involves writing checks. I have been, quite frankly, bored and underutilized for years. This trip has reminded me that I'm still capable of learning, growing, and having adventures. I never thought about it that way. David, I spent 40 years building a business, raising you after your father died, and managing substantial assets. I didn't retire from life when I stepped back from the company. I retired from one role to explore others. So, when are you coming home? I'm not sure I am. Coming home, that is. At least not to the same life I had before. What do you mean? I mean, I'm considering making some changes to how I live, how I spend my time, and how I structure my relationships with family. What kind of changes? Well, for one thing, I'm thinking of selling the house in Greenwich. It's far too large for one person, and frankly, it holds too many memories of being taken for granted. I'm considering buying something in the city, maybe a penthouse with views and space for entertaining. Selling the house? The panic was immediate. Mom, that's my childhood home. That's where all our family memories are. Your family memories, David. But it's my house, my mortgage payments, and my property taxes. And since you've made it clear that I'm not central to your current family plans, perhaps it's time I created living arrangements that better suit my actual role in your life. That's not fair, Mom. Isn't it? David, you excluded me from your engagement dinner, but now you're upset that I might sell the house where you grew up? You can't have it both ways. Either I'm family who should be included in major decisions, or I'm an independent woman managing her own life. Which is it? Another long pause. I'm starting to think I made a mistake about the engagement dinner. Finally, the acknowledgement I had been waiting for. What kind of mistake? I think I hurt your feelings more than I realized, and I think excluding you sent a message I didn't mean to send. What message was that? That you don't matter, that your feelings don't count, that you're not really part of my new family. And is that what you meant? No. God, no. Mom, you're the most important person in my life. You always have been. I guess I took that for granted. Progress. Real progress. David, I appreciate you saying that, but I need you to understand that taking people for granted has consequences. And right now I'm exploring what those consequences might look like. What do you mean? I mean, I'm meeting with some advisors when I get back to New York. About estate planning, about restructuring some of my commitments, about creating accountability in my family relationships. Accountability? David, I've been your safety net, your reference, your financial backer, and your professional connection for years. But if I'm going to continue in those roles, I need to know that you value and respect what I bring to your life. I do value it, Mom. I do. Then we'll discuss how to demonstrate that value when I return. I'll be back in New York in 2 weeks. We can have lunch and talk about how we want our relationship to work going forward. After I hung up, I walked out onto the villa's terrace and looked out over the Tuscan hills where generations of families had built legacies based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. David was beginning to understand that his actions had consequences, but he didn't yet realize the full extent of what I was planning. Because while he was worried about lunch conversations and hurt feelings, I was designing a comprehensive restructuring of our family dynamics that would ensure he never again had the luxury of taking his mother for granted. Tomorrow, I would make the calls that would put the final pieces of my strategy into motion. But tonight, I simply enjoyed the satisfaction of knowing that Margaret Harrison was back in control of her own narrative. Venice was supposed to be my final stop before returning to New York, but it became the place where I discovered the true depth of David's betrayal. The gritty palace was the perfect setting for what I was about to learn. Opulent, historic, and dramatic enough to match the revelation that would change everything. I was having breakfast on the terrace overlooking the Grand Canal when Patricia called with news that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Harrison, I've been doing the research you requested into David's financial situation, and I've discovered something disturbing. 3 months ago, he took out a significant loan using your house as collateral." The espresso cup trembled in my hand. "He did what?" "He used the power of attorney you gave him for property management to secure a loan for $250,000. The documents show it was for family investment purposes, but I can't find any record of where that money went." I set down my cup very carefully, my mind racing through the implications. David had power of attorney for property management, something I had granted him 2 years ago when I was traveling frequently and needed someone to handle maintenance issues and tenant communications for my rental properties. It was meant to be a convenience, not a blank check to leverage my primary residence. "Patricia, I want you to hire a private investigator immediately. I need to know exactly where that money went, and I need to know today." "Already on it, Mrs. Harrison. I should have preliminary information by this afternoon." After I hung up, I sat staring at the Grand Canal, watching water taxis navigate the ancient waterways, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine betrayal. Not just exclusion or thoughtlessness, but active deception and potential fraud. My phone buzzed with a message from Elena, my new friend from Tuscany. "How's Venice, darling? Remember what we discussed about family accountability? Sometimes the people closest to us feel entitled to liberties they would never take with strangers." She was right. David would never dream of taking out a loan against a colleague's property without explicit written permission. But apparently, his mother's assets were fair game for whatever he needed. The private investigator Patricia hired was remarkably efficient. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I had a comprehensive report that painted a picture of financial desperation and deception that took my breath away. The $250,000 had gone to cover David's gambling debts. Not casual poker games or lottery tickets, but serious, high-stakes gambling that had apparently been going on for over a year. He had been betting on sports through offshore accounts, playing high-limit online poker, and making increasingly desperate attempts to win back his losses. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Jessica knew. She had been covering for him, making excuses for their frequent business trips to Atlantic City and Las Vegas, and even taking out credit cards in her name to help service his debts. The engagement dinner suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't just celebrating their love. They were consolidating their finances and their secrets. Jessica's parents weren't just there to witness a proposal. They were there to discuss David's financial problems and how their wealthy families might help solve them. I had been excluded not because I was inconvenient, but because I was dangerous. I might ask questions. I might want to understand why my successful lawyer's son needed help with money. I might discover that he had already stolen $250,000 from me. I sat in my suite at the gritty palace, looking out at the eternal beauty of Venice, and felt something crystallize inside me that was harder than diamond and twice as sharp. This wasn't about hurt feelings or family dynamics anymore. This was about criminal behavior, and it was time to respond accordingly. I called James Morrison. Mr. Morrison, I need to accelerate our timeline. I want to meet as soon as I return to New York, and I want to explore the most comprehensive family accountability structure you've ever created. What's changed, Mrs. Harrison? I've discovered that my son has been stealing from me, significant amounts, and I suspect his fiancée is complicit. I want to create legal structures that will protect my assets while giving them the opportunity to earn back my trust through demonstrated behavioral change. How significant are we talking about? 250,000 so far, possibly more. And Mr. Morrison? I want consequences. Real, meaningful consequences that will ensure this never happens again. I understand. I'll prepare several options for your review. That evening, I did something I had never done before. I posted a photo that was deliberately strategic rather than simply beautiful. It was me at sunset on the terrace of the gritty palace, holding a glass of Prosecco, looking contemplative and powerful. But the caption was what mattered. Venice teaches you that even the most beautiful facades can hide structural problems beneath. Sometimes you have to look deeper to understand what's really happening. Grateful for this time to gain perspective on what truly matters. Venice. Perspective, truth, clarity, protecting, what matters. Within an hour, my phone was ringing. David's panic was immediate and obvious. Mom, what does that post mean? Structural problems? Looking deeper? Are you talking about our family? I'm talking about life in general, David. Venice is a city built on very shaky foundations, but it endures because people constantly work to maintain and protect it. But why did you hashtag protecting what matters? Are you okay? Is someone bothering you? The irony was breathtaking. He was worried about someone bothering me while he had stolen $250,000 from me. I'm fine, David. In fact, I'm better than fine. This trip has given me incredible clarity about my priorities and my relationships. What kind of clarity? The kind that comes from distance and perspective. I've learned so much about myself, about what I want from the rest of my life, and about how I want to structure my relationships with the people I love. Structure your relationships? David, when I get back to New York, we're going to have a very comprehensive conversation about our family dynamics, your financial situation, and my expectations going forward. The silence was deafening. My financial situation? Mom, why would we talk about my finances? And there it was. He was going to pretend he didn't know what I was talking about. He was going to make me accuse him directly, force me to be the bad guy who didn't trust her son. Just some general concerns about family financial planning and responsibility. Nothing urgent but important for long-term family harmony. Mom, you're scaring me. You don't sound like yourself. I sound exactly like myself, David. Perhaps more like myself than I have in years. This trip has reminded me that I'm still a very capable woman with excellent judgment and strong protective instincts. Protective instincts about what? About everything that matters to me. My assets, my legacy, my family relationships. I've realized I've been too passive about ensuring that the people I love treat me with appropriate respect and honesty. After I hung up, I called Patricia one more time. Patricia, I want you to arrange a meeting with my accountant, my attorney, and James Morrison for the day after I return. I also want you to pull all the financial records for every account, property, and investment where David has any access or authority. Should I be concerned about anything specific, Mrs. Harrison? You should be concerned about everything, Patricia. It's time for a complete audit of my family's financial integrity. That night, I walked through the narrow streets of Venice, marveling at how a city built on water had survived for over 1,000 years through constant vigilance, adaptation, and the willingness to address problems before they became catastrophic. David had made the mistake of thinking that his mother was a fixed foundation he could exploit without consequences. He was about to learn that Margaret Harrison was more like Venice itself, beautiful, enduring, but built on bedrock principles that would not be compromised. When I returned to New York in 3 days, I would begin the most comprehensive restructuring of my family relationships that any of them could imagine. But more than that, I would ensure that David faced real consequences for his betrayal while still giving him the opportunity to earn back what he had lost. Because that's what real love looks like. Not unconditional enabling, but accountability with the possibility of redemption. The question was whether David was smart enough to recognize the lifeline I was about to throw him, or whether his arrogance and desperation would lead him to reject the only path back to my trust and financial support. Either way, Margaret Harrison was done being anyone's victim. The first-class cabin of the Alitalia flight from Venice to JFK gave me 8 hours to finalize the most comprehensive family intervention strategy of my life. By the time we touched down in New York, I had created what I privately called the Margaret Harrison Family Accountability Protocol, a multi-layered approach that would give David every opportunity to redeem himself while ensuring he could never again exploit my trust. Patricia met me at the airport with a folder that made my Italian discoveries look like amateur hour. Mrs. Harrison, the full investigation results are devastating. The gambling debts total nearly $400,000 spread across multiple offshore accounts. The $250,000 he took against your house was just the beginning. He's also been systematically transferring money from the joint account you set up for family emergencies. We sat in the back of my car as my driver navigated Manhattan traffic, and I reviewed documents that painted a picture of systematic deception spanning 18 months. David hadn't just stolen from me once. He had been steadily draining accounts I had established for legitimate family needs, using his access to cover his gambling addiction. There's more, Mrs. Harrison. Jessica has been complicit. She took out credit cards in her name, but David has been using them. They're planning to consolidate their debts through marriage and then declare bankruptcy, which would protect both their future earnings and any assets transferred to Jessica's name. The sophistication of their plan was almost admirable. David was using his legal training to orchestrate a comprehensive financial fraud that would leave him free and clear while destroying my assets and credit. And the engagement dinner exclusion? According to the investigator's source, someone who works with Jessica's family, they specifically didn't want you there because they were discussing the debt consolidation plan with her parents. They needed Jessica's family to co-sign some loans and didn't want you asking questions about why David needed financial help. So I hadn't been excluded from a family celebration. I had been excluded from a criminal conspiracy planning meeting. My penthouse apartment overlooked Central Park, and as I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows that evening, sipping wine and watching the city lights twinkle below, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my corporate days, the thrill of having a worthy opponent who had severely underestimated me. James Morrison arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, carrying a briefcase full of documents that would revolutionize how my family operated. Mrs. Harrison, I've created what I believe is the most comprehensive family accountability trust structure I've ever designed. It addresses immediate asset protection while creating incentives for behavioral rehabilitation. He spread the documents across my dining room table like a general planning a campaign. First, we immediately revoke all existing powers of attorney and freeze access to joint accounts. Second, we create a new trust structure where David can earn back inheritance privileges through demonstrated behavioral changes. Third, we establish legal mechanisms to recover the stolen funds while giving him the opportunity to voluntarily make restitution. What about consequences? That's the beautiful part. The trust includes what we call relationship clauses. To maintain any inheritance eligibility, David must participate in financial counseling, gambling addiction treatment, and family therapy. He must also make monthly restitution payments and maintain employment in good standing. And if he refuses, then he gets nothing. Not just reduced inheritance, nothing. The trust transfers his entire portion to charitable organizations focused on gambling addiction recovery and elder financial abuse prevention. The poetic justice was exquisite. There's also a reputation protection clause. If he tries to challenge the trust or make public accusations about your mental competency, he immediately forfeits all future considerations, and the trust releases documentation of his financial crimes to his employer and the State Bar Association. When can we implement this? The paperwork can be ready by tomorrow afternoon. But Mrs. Harrison, I recommend giving him one opportunity to come clean voluntarily before we activate these measures. If he confesses and agrees to the rehabilitation program, we can frame this as family support rather than punishment. And if he doesn't, then we implement the full protocol, and he learns that stealing from Margaret Harrison was the biggest mistake of his legal career. The next morning, I called David from my apartment. "David, I'm back in New York. I'd like you to come to dinner tonight. Just you, not Jessica. I want to have a private conversation about some things I learned during my trip." "Mom, I'm so glad you're back. I was worried sick. Can we talk about whatever's bothering you? I feel like there's been some kind of misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. He was still playing innocent. "I'm sure we can clear everything up tonight. 7 o'clock. And David, I want you to bring something with you." "What's that?" "I want you to bring honesty. Complete, total honesty about everything that's been happening in your life over the past year and a half." The silence stretched for so long I could practically hear him calculating. "What do you mean, everything?" "I mean everything, David. Financial decisions, personal challenges, future plans. I've had a lot of time to think during my trip, and I've realized that I don't know nearly enough about what's actually happening in your life." "Okay, Mom, I can do that." That afternoon, I made 3 strategic phone calls that would set the stage for the evening's confrontation. The first was to Jessica. "Jessica, dear, it's Margaret. I just wanted to let you know I'm back from my trip and looking forward to getting to know you better. Perhaps we could have lunch next week. Mrs. Harrison, I'd love that. I hope you had a wonderful time in Italy. I learned so much about family dynamics and the importance of honesty in relationships. I have some beautiful photos to share with you. I think you'll find them very illuminating." The second call was to David's senior partner at his law firm. "Richard, it's Margaret Harrison. I wanted to thank you again for the reference letter you provided for David's club membership. Your opinion means so much to our family. Margaret, David is one of our most promising associates. We're lucky to have him." "I hope so, Richard. I truly hope so. I'll be interested to see how his career develops over the next few months." The third call was to my security company. "I want to install recording equipment in my dining room today, the highest quality available. I have a feeling tonight's family dinner is going to be historically significant." By 7 o'clock, my apartment was prepared for the most important conversation of my son's life. The dining room was elegant but intimidating, with documents strategically placed but not obviously visible. I had dressed in my most authoritative business attire, the navy suit I used to wear for hostile takeover negotiations. David arrived precisely on time, looking nervous but trying to project confidence. He had always been handsome, tall, dark-haired like his father, with the kind of smile that had charmed teachers, professors, and apparently offshore gambling sites. "Mom, you look incredible. Italy clearly agreed with you." "Italy taught me many things, David. Please sit down. We have a lot to discuss." I poured us each a glass of wine, a Barolo I had shipped back from Tuscany, and settled into my chair with the composure I had perfected in 40 years of high-stakes negotiations. "David, I want to start with a simple question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer." He nodded, trying to look open and trustworthy. "Is there anything you've done in the past year and a half that you think I should know about? Anything that might affect our family relationship or your future?" The moment of truth had arrived. David could confess, throw himself on my mercy, and accept the rehabilitation program that would allow him to earn back my trust. Or he could continue lying and face the full consequences of trying to defraud Margaret Harrison. His next words would determine whether he was smart enough to recognize the lifeline I was offering, or whether he was about to discover exactly what happened when you underestimate a woman who had built her fortune by being smarter, tougher, and more strategic than everyone who challenged her. The choice was his, but the consequences were entirely mine to control. David took a sip of wine, looked me directly in the eyes, and made the decision that would seal his fate. "Mom, I honestly don't know what you're referring to. I mean, I've made some mistakes here and there. Everyone does. But nothing that would affect our family or my future. I think maybe your trip gave you too much time to worry about things that aren't really problems." There it was. Complete denial. Even when handed a golden opportunity to confess and seek help, He chose to continue the deception and gaslight me into believing I was imagining problems. I set down my wine glass with the deliberate precision I used to employ before destroying opponents in business negotiations. David, I'm going to give you one more chance to answer that question. Is there anything you've done in the past year and a half that I should know about? Mom, you're making me nervous. Did someone tell you something? Because if they did, you need to consider the source. There are people who might want to cause problems between us. He was now trying to make me paranoid about my sources rather than addressing the question. The manipulation was textbook. Deflect, redirect, make the victim doubt their information. No one told me anything, David. I discovered things myself, through my own investigation. His face went white, but he recovered quickly. What kind of investigation? Mom, that's a little extreme, isn't it? Investigating your own son? Is it more extreme than stealing from your own mother? The words hung in the air like a sword. David's composure finally cracked, and I watched him calculate rapidly. How much did I know? How much could he still deny? What were his options? I don't know what you think you discovered, but I slid the first document across the table. It was the loan paperwork showing my house as collateral. $250,000, David. Against my house, without my knowledge or consent. He stared at the document, his lawyer's mind probably racing through possible explanations, legal defenses, or exit strategies. Mom, I can explain that. I was going to tell you. I needed some short-term capital for an investment opportunity, and I was planning to pay it back before you ever knew about it. What investment opportunity? A client introduced me to a cryptocurrency venture. The returns were supposed to be incredible, but the timing didn't work out. Even his lies were pathetic. Cryptocurrency, the excuse of choice for desperate gamblers. I slid the second document across the table. Bank records showing systematic withdrawals from our joint emergency account. $67,000 in withdrawals over 8 months, David. From the account I established for genuine family emergencies. What emergency were you addressing? His hands were visibly shaking now as he picked up the document. Mom, Look, I've been having some financial difficulties. The cost of living in Manhattan, the pressure at the firm, the engagement expenses. I was planning to replace all of it as soon as my next bonus came through. I slid the third document across the table. The private investigator's report detailing his gambling activity across multiple offshore sites. $412,000 in gambling losses, David. Spread across 18 months, sports betting, online poker, high-stakes casino games. This wasn't investment or emergency expenses. This was addiction. David stared at the report, and I watched the last of his pretense crumble. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time since he was a child, he looked genuinely afraid. How did you find all this? I'm Margaret Harrison, David. I built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. Did you really think I wouldn't notice $400,000 disappearing from my accounts? Did you actually believe you were smarter than the woman who taught you everything you know about strategic thinking? He put his head in his hands. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to get this bad. It started small, just some sports betting with friends from work. But then I had some big wins, and I thought I could make enough to solve all my money problems. What money problems? David, you make $250,000 a year at one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. But it's not enough. The words exploded out of him. Do you know what it costs to live the way Jessica expects? The restaurants, the vacations, the engagement ring that cost 3 months' salary? Her friends' husbands are investment bankers making millions, and I'm supposed to compete with that on an associate's salary? So you decided to steal from me instead of having an honest conversation about your financial pressures? I didn't think of it as stealing. I thought of it as borrowing against my inheritance. I figured I would win enough to pay everything back and you would never know. And Jessica, what's her role in this? David's face went even paler. What do you mean? I slid the fourth document across the table. Credit card records in Jessica's name with David as an authorized user. $34,000 in debt on cards Jessica opened to help fund your gambling. She's been complicit in this fraud for months, David. She was trying to help me. She didn't want me to lose you or my job, so she offered to help me manage the situation until I could get back on my feet. By helping you steal more money? By helping me buy time. Time for what, David? Time to steal more? Time to gamble away more of my money? Time to perfect your system of lying to me? He was crying now, something I hadn't seen since his father's funeral. Mom, please. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I'm your son. I'm your only child. You can't just abandon me. I'm not abandoning you, David. But I'm also not enabling you anymore. I reached for the final set of documents, the trust paperwork James Morrison had prepared. David, you have two choices. You can accept help, or you can accept consequences. But the days of stealing from me while pretending to be the perfect son are over. What kind of help? Gambling addiction treatment, financial counseling, family therapy, monthly restitution payments. Complete transparency about your finances, and Jessica gets the same requirements if she wants to be part of this family. And if I refuse, then you get nothing. No inheritance, no safety net, no family support, and I file criminal charges for theft and fraud. David stared at the trust documents, his legal training allowing him to understand exactly what he was looking at. This would put you in control of everything. David, I've been in control of everything since you were born. The only difference is that now you know it. He sat quietly for several minutes, reading through the documents, understanding the full scope of what I was offering and what I was threatening. What about my engagement, my job, my life? That depends entirely on the choices you make tonight. You can either be David Harrison, the gambling addict who stole from his mother, or David Harrison, the man who got help and rebuilt his family relationships through accountability and hard work. And if I agree to this, you won't tell anyone what happened? If you complete the program successfully, this remains between us. If you don't, it becomes public record in criminal court. David looked around my dining room, the room where I had helped him with homework, celebrated his achievements, and supported his dreams, and I could see him finally understanding the full weight of what he had risked and what he stood to lose. Can I talk to Jessica about this? David, Jessica is going to get her own invitation to this conversation. What you decide tonight affects only you. He picked up a pen from the table and stared at it for a long moment. If I sign this, does that mean you forgive me? David, forgiveness and trust are two different things. I will always love you because you're my son, but you're going to have to earn back the privilege of my trust, my financial support, and my respect. How long will that take? That depends entirely on how committed you are to changing the person you've become. David Harrison, Harvard Law graduate, associate at one of New York's most prestigious firms, and my only child, picked up the pen and signed the documents that would transform him from entitled son to accountable adult. But as I watched him write his name, I knew that signing the papers was the easy part. The real test would be whether he had the character to honor the commitment he was making, or whether this was just another manipulation in his increasingly desperate game. Either way, Margaret Harrison was no longer anyone's victim. The woman who had survived corporate takeovers, built a fortune, and raised a son alone was back in control of her family's destiny. And David was about to learn that accountability, like fine wine, only improves with time and pressure. The week after David signed the accountability agreement was when I implemented the most elegant phase of my strategy. While he was adjusting to his new reality of supervised finances and mandatory counseling, I was setting a trap that would expose Jessica's true character and complete my family's transformation. I called Jessica on Thursday morning with an invitation that was both generous and calculated. Jessica, dear, I know this has been a difficult time for everyone. I'd love to take you shopping this weekend, a proper mother-daughter bonding experience. I want to welcome you to the family properly and help you pick out something special for the engagement party I'm planning. Mrs. Harrison, that's so thoughtful. I was worried you might be upset about everything that's happened. Nonsense, darling. David's problems are David's problems. You and I need to build our own relationship. Meet me at Bergdorf's on Saturday at 10. I've arranged for a personal shopping consultation. What Jessica didn't know was that our shopping expedition was actually an elaborate test designed to reveal whether she was a victim of David's deception or an active participant in his fraud. Saturday morning at Bergdorf Goodman, I watched Jessica's eyes light up as we were escorted to the private shopping suites on the 9th floor. The personal shopper had prepared a selection of designer dresses, each costing between $3,000 and $8,000. Mrs. Harrison, this is incredible. I've never experienced anything like this. Please, call me Margaret. and this is nothing compared to what we could do together. I'm thinking of planning a destination engagement party, perhaps the Hamptons, or maybe something in Europe. Money is no object when it comes to celebrating family. Jessica tried on dress after dress, each one more expensive than the last. But it wasn't until she was wearing a $12,000 Oscar de la Renta gown that I made my move. Jessica, you look absolutely stunning. That dress is perfect for the announcement photos. Of course, David might be a little stressed about the expense given his current financial situation. Her face changed instantly. The practiced smile faltered, and I saw something calculating behind her eyes. What do you mean, his financial situation? Oh dear, hasn't he told you? He's agreed to some very strict financial monitoring as part of working through his gambling problem. Every purchase has to be approved, every expense justified. It's going to be quite an adjustment for both of you. Jessica turned to look at herself in the mirror, still wearing the $12,000 dress, and I watched her process this information. How strict is very strict? Well, he'll have a monthly allowance for personal expenses, and everything else goes through the trust administrators. No major purchases, no luxury items, no spontaneous vacations. At least not until he's proven he can handle money responsibly. What about after we're married? I mean, won't that change things? And there it was, the question that revealed everything. Actually, Jessica, that's something we should discuss. The trust has some very specific provisions about spouses and their access to family assets. I pulled out a folder I had prepared specifically for this moment. These are the marriage clauses in David's accountability trust. Any spouse would need to agree to the same financial monitoring, the same transparency requirements, and the same behavioral standards. Jessica took the documents and read them with the focus of someone whose entire future depended on their contents, which of course it did. This says I would need permission to make purchases over $500. That's right. And all credit cards would be monitored. All bank accounts would be joint with the trust as overseer. It's quite comprehensive. For how long? Until David completes his rehabilitation program and demonstrates consistent, responsible behavior. Could be 2 years, could be 5, could be longer. Jessica sat down heavily in the dressing room chair, still wearing the designer gown, and I watched her beautiful mask slip completely. Margaret, can I be honest with you? Please do. I love David, I really do. But I didn't sign up for this kind of restriction. I mean, I have my own career, my own goals. I don't want to be treated like a financial criminal just because David made some mistakes. Of course not, dear. That's why I wanted to discuss this with you privately. You have choices. What kind of choices? I leaned forward slightly, adopting the tone I used to use when closing the most important deals of my career. Jessica, you're a beautiful, intelligent young woman with your entire life ahead of you. David's problems don't have to become your problems. If you decided that this situation isn't what you bargained for, I would completely understand. But we're engaged. We've sent invitations. My parents have already booked flights for the wedding. Engagements can be broken, Jessica. It happens all the time. And if you decided that David's current circumstances weren't compatible with the life you want to build, I would even help make that transition easier for you. What do you mean? I mean that if you decided to end the engagement, I would provide you with enough financial support to get settled independently. A nice apartment, perhaps, and enough cushion to focus on your career without David's baggage weighing you down. Jessica stared at herself in the mirror, wearing a dress that cost more than most people make in 3 months, and I could see her calculating. This was the moment of truth. Was she a woman who loved David enough to stand by him through recovery, or was she someone who had been attracted to what she thought was his family's wealth? How much financial support are we talking about? And there was my answer. Enough to be comfortable, Jessica. Very comfortable. She was quiet for several minutes, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. Finally, she spoke. Margaret, I need to ask you something directly. Do you want me to break up with David? I considered my response carefully. This was the most delicate part of the entire operation. Jessica, I want what's best for everyone involved. David needs to focus entirely on his recovery without the pressure of maintaining a relationship he can't afford. You deserve to be with someone who can give you the life you want without restrictions or monitoring. And I deserve to know that the people in my family are there because they love us, not because they need us. And you think I need you? I think you're a practical woman who's finding out that the Harrison family comes with complications you didn't anticipate. Jessica looked at herself in the mirror one more time, then began removing the Oscar de la Renta gown. Margaret, I think I need some time to think about everything you've said. Of course, dear. Take all the time you need. But Jessica, whatever you decide, decide quickly. David's recovery program starts next week, and it would be better for everyone if he knew where he stood before then. We left Bergdorf's without purchasing anything, but I had gained something far more valuable than designer dresses. I had confirmed that Jessica was exactly what I suspected, an opportunist who was in love with the idea of marrying into wealth, not with David himself. That evening, I called David. David, how are you adjusting to your new financial arrangements? It's harder than I thought, Mom, but I'm committed to making this work. I'm proud of you for taking responsibility. Have you talked to Jessica about how the trust affects your future together? We've discussed it. She's adjusting to the idea. I'm sure she is. David, I want you to know that whatever happens with your relationship, your recovery comes first. Don't make any major life decisions based on what other people need or expect from you. What do you mean? I mean that if Jessica decides this situation isn't what she wants, that's information about her, not about you. The right person will stand by you through difficult times, not abandon you when the money gets tight. There was a long pause. Mom, are you trying to tell me something about Jessica? I'm trying to tell you something about yourself, David. You're worth loving even when you can't buy expensive dinners or designer gifts. If someone only wants to be with you when you can spend freely, they don't really want to be with you at all. After I hung up, I sat in my living room overlooking Central Park and felt the satisfaction of a plan coming together perfectly. Jessica would break up with David within the week. I was certain of it. And when she did, it would complete David's education about the difference between people who love you and people who love what you can provide. More importantly, it would remove the last enabler from David's life and force him to confront his problems without the distraction of maintaining a relationship built on financial pretense. Margaret Harrison had spent 6 weeks in Italy learning about Renaissance and rebirth. Now I was orchestrating the renaissance of my family, one strategic move at a time. The only question remaining was whether David was strong enough to emerge from this transformation as the man I had raised him to be, or whether he would crumble under the weight of finally facing the truth about himself and everyone around him. Either way, the woman who had built a fortune by outmaneuvering smarter, richer, more connected opponents was back in control of her family's destiny. And this time, I wasn't taking any prisoners. Jessica lasted exactly 5 days. The call came on Thursday evening while I was reviewing quarterly investment reports in my study. David's voice was barely controlled, shaking with a combination of rage, heartbreak, and something that might have been relief. Mom, Jessica broke up with me. She gave me back the ring and said she couldn't handle the financial uncertainty of our future together. I'm sorry to hear that, David. How are you feeling? How am I feeling? I'm destroyed, Mom. We were supposed to get married in 6 months. We had deposits on venues. We sent save the dates. Her parents flew here from Seattle to meet with wedding planners. What reason did she give? There was a long pause, and I could hear him trying to compose himself. She said she realized we weren't financially compatible anymore. She said she needed to be with someone who could provide the lifestyle she expected without restrictions or oversight. And what did you say to that? I told her that the restrictions were temporary, that I was working through my problems, that we could build something together. But she said she couldn't wait around hoping I would get better. David's voice cracked on the word better, and my heart ached for him despite everything he had put me through. David, I know this hurts right now, but Mom, she knew. She knew about my gambling problems for months. She helped me hide it from you. She took out credit cards to help me manage the debt. But the minute there were actual consequences for our choices, she bailed. This was progress. Real, meaningful progress. David was beginning to see Jessica's behavior clearly instead of through the lens of desperate need and romantic fantasy. What does that tell you about her? It tells me that she was never really with me. She was with the idea of me, the version where I could take her to expensive restaurants and buy her whatever she wanted without thinking about it. And now? Now I realize that I don't even know who I am without the ability to spend money to solve problems or impress people. I've been using money as a substitute for actual personality for so long that I don't remember what I'm like when I can't just buy my way into people's good opinion. I set down my investment reports and gave David my complete attention. This was the conversation I had been hoping for since the day he signed the accountability agreement. David, that's one of the most insightful things you've said in years. Is it? Because it doesn't feel insightful. It feels pathetic. I'm 28 years old, and I just realized that my entire adult identity was built around spending money I didn't have to impress people who didn't really like me. That's not pathetic, David. That's honest. And honesty is the first step toward building something real. But what if there's nothing real underneath? What if I take away the money and the status and the expensive lifestyle, and there's just nothing? This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when David stopped defending his behavior and started questioning the fundamental assumptions that had led him to steal from his own mother. David, do you remember what you wanted to be when you were 12 years old? What does that have to do with anything? Just answer the question. I wanted to be a public defender. I wanted to help people who couldn't afford good lawyers. And what changed? I grew up. I realized that public defenders don't make any money, that they work in terrible conditions, that they never win cases that matter. Or you learned that society doesn't value public defenders, so you decided that work wasn't worth doing. Maybe. I don't know. Everything got confused somewhere along the way. David, I want you to think about something. The man who wanted to be a public defender at 12, what do you think he would say about the man who stole $400,000 from his mother to fund gambling addiction? The silence stretched so long, I thought he might have hung up. He would be disgusted. And what would he think about a man who excluded his mother from his engagement dinner because he was afraid she might ask inconvenient questions about his finances? He would think that man had lost his way completely. David, that 12-year-old boy is still in there somewhere. This recovery program isn't just about stopping gambling. It's about finding out who you actually are when you're not hiding behind other people's money. What if I don't like who I find? Then you change him. That's what growth means, David. You become the person you respect instead of staying the person you're ashamed of. We talked for another hour, the longest honest conversation we had had in years. David told me about the shame he felt every time he placed a bet, about the panic attacks he had been having when the gambling debts started mounting, about the way he had been lying to everyone in his life for so long that he had started believing his own deceptions. But more importantly, he talked about feeling relieved that Jessica was gone. Mom, I think I was more attached to the idea of being engaged than to actually being with Jessica. Like, having a fiancée made me feel like a successful adult, but I don't think I ever really enjoyed her company. What didn't you enjoy about it? She was always pushing me to spend more money, go to more expensive places, buy better things. Every conversation was about upgrading something. Our apartment, our vacation plans, our social circle. I felt like I was constantly failing some test I didn't understand. The test was how much you were willing to spend to keep her happy, and I failed it the moment I couldn't spend freely anymore. David, you didn't fail anything. You discovered something important about what she valued in your relationship, which was my credit limit, apparently. Despite everything, I smiled. David's sense of humor, dry, self-deprecating but insightful, had been missing for months. Its return was a good sign. David, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Okay. Are you ready to find out who David Harrison actually is when he's not trying to buy people's approval? I don't know if I'm ready, but I don't think I have a choice anymore. You always have a choice. You could walk away from the recovery program, declare bankruptcy, start over somewhere else with a different name and a clean slate. Is that what you want me to do? David, what I want is for you to want to be someone you can respect. If you're only doing this program to get back in my good graces or to access your inheritance, it won't work. Then why are you helping me at all? Why didn't you just cut me off completely and file criminal charges? This was the question I had been asking myself since the night he signed the accountability agreement. Because despite everything you've done, I still believe that somewhere inside the man who stole from me is the boy who wanted to help people who couldn't afford good lawyers. And if there's even a chance that person still exists, he's worth saving. What if I disappoint you again? David, You can't disappoint me more than you already have. From here, the only direction is up. After we hung up, I walked out onto my terrace and looked out over Central Park. The trees were just beginning to change colors. Autumn in New York, the season of transformation and preparation for the challenges ahead. David had lost his fiancée, his financial safety net, and his illusions about himself all in the same week. He was about to discover whether he had the character to rebuild his life on a foundation of honesty and accountability, or whether he would crumble under the weight of facing reality without the crutch of other people's money. But for the first time since I discovered his theft, I felt genuinely hopeful. The conversation we had just had was the most honest, vulnerable, and insightful discussion we had shared since he was a child. Margaret Harrison had orchestrated the collapse of her son's fraudulent life. Now it remained to be seen whether David Harrison had the strength to build something authentic from the wreckage. Either way, the woman who had survived corporate takeovers, raised a son alone, and turned a family crisis into a comprehensive intervention was ready for whatever came next. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone to destroy themselves. 3 weeks into David's recovery program, everything exploded in the most public way imaginable. I was having lunch at Le Bernardin with Elena, my friend from Tuscany who was visiting New York, when my phone started buzzing incessantly. Text after text, missed call after missed call, until finally I excused myself to check what could possibly be so urgent. The first message was from Patricia. Mrs. Harrison, you need to see the New York Post immediately, page 6. I'm sending you the link now. The headline made my blood freeze. Gambling heir's mother abandons son in rehab. Family sources say Margaret Harrison heartlessly cuts off troubled son after engagement collapse. The article was a masterpiece of manipulation and half-truths. According to anonymous family sources, I was a cold, controlling mother who had discovered David's gambling problem and responded by imposing draconian financial restrictions that drove away his loving fiancé. The piece painted Jessica as a victim who couldn't bear to watch the man she loved being psychologically tortured by his own mother's need for control. But the most damaging part was the quote attributed to a source close to the family. Margaret Harrison waited until her son was at his most vulnerable and then used his addiction as an excuse to seize complete control of his finances. She's using his recovery program as a form of elder abuse in reverse, punishing him for asking for help. My hands were shaking as I read the article. Someone had given the Post detailed information about David's gambling addiction, the accountability trust, and even my trip to Italy. The timing, the language, the specific details. This wasn't random gossip. This was a coordinated attack. I called David immediately. Mom, I am so sorry. I don't know how this happened. I never talked to any reporters. I would never. David, who knew the specific details about your treatment program and the trust structure? Just you, me, the lawyers, and... His voice trailed off as the realization hit him. And Jessica. But she wouldn't. Why would she do this? Because Jessica is discovering that there are consequences for walking away from people who have information about your behavior. David, I think she's trying to control the narrative about why your engagement ended. The second wave of calls came an hour later. David's law firm, his club, mutual friends, even distant relatives who hadn't spoken to our family in years, all reaching out with concern, confusion, or barely concealed curiosity about the family drama now splashed across the tabloids. But the call that changed everything came that evening from James Morrison. Margaret, we have a problem. Jessica has hired her own attorney, and she's threatening to sue both you and David for emotional distress and defamation. She's claiming that the financial restrictions you imposed damaged her reputation and cost her emotional and financial security. On what grounds? She's arguing that David made financial commitments to her based on his access to family money, and that by restricting that access, you interfered with their contractual relationship and caused her measurable harm. The audacity was breathtaking. Jessica was trying to claim legal damages for losing access to money that David had been stealing. James, I want you to prepare for war. Full documentation, complete financial records, evidence of the gambling addiction and theft. If Jessica wants to make this public and legal, then let's make sure the full truth comes out. Margaret, are you sure? This could get very ugly very quickly. The media attention alone could be damaging to your reputation and David's career. James, Jessica made a critical miscalculation. She assumed I would be embarrassed about David's problems and willing to settle quietly to make this go away. She doesn't understand that I'm not ashamed of holding my son accountable for stealing from me. I'm proud of it. That night, I made a decision that would escalate the entire situation beyond what anyone had imagined. Instead of hiding from the story or trying to control the damage, I was going to take control of the narrative completely. I called my old friend Richard Chen, who had retired as editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal but still had connections throughout the financial media world. Richard, it's Margaret Harrison. I need a favor. Margaret, I saw the Post story. Are you all right? I'm better than all right, Richard. I'm about to give someone the exclusive story of their career. Are you still in touch with Sarah Martinez at the Financial Times? Of course. Why? Because I'm ready to tell the real story about family accountability, elder financial abuse, and what happens when a mother refuses to enable her son's criminal behavior. Within 48 hours, Sarah Martinez was sitting in my living room with a recording device and the complete documentation of David's theft, gambling addiction, and recovery program. But more than that, she had the story of how a successful businesswoman had discovered her son's fraud and implemented one of the most comprehensive family intervention strategies ever created. Mrs. Harrison, this is remarkable. You essentially created a real-time case study in family financial accountability. The trust structure, the behavioral requirements, the rehabilitation program. It's like a masterclass in turning a family crisis into a growth opportunity. Sarah, I want people to understand that enabling destructive behavior isn't loving. Real love sometimes means allowing people to experience the consequences of their choices while providing them with the tools to make better ones. The Financial Times article, published the following Sunday, was everything I could have hoped for. Under the headline, "When Family Love Requires Tough Choices, the Margaret Harrison Accountability Model," Sarah had crafted a nuanced, detailed exploration of modern family dynamics, addiction recovery, and the difference between support and enablement. But more importantly, she had included Jessica's lawsuit threat and Jessica's own role in David's gambling cover-up, complete with documentation of the credit cards and loans Jessica had used to facilitate David's addiction. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Financial advisors calling to ask about implementing similar family structures, academic researchers requesting interviews about accountability trusts, other families dealing with adult children's addiction problems, asking for guidance and hope. But the most satisfying response came from David himself. "Mom, I read the Financial Times article. I can't believe you turned this whole nightmare into something that might actually help other families. David, our story doesn't have to be just about your mistakes. It can also be about recovery, growth, and the kind of love that refuses to give up on people, even when they've given up on themselves. I'm proud of you, Mom. I know that sounds weird given everything that's happened, but I'm proud that you're my mother." It was the first time in years that David had expressed pride in me, rather than asking for something from me. The shift was subtle but profound. He was beginning to see me as a person with my own strengths and wisdom, not just as a resource for his needs. "David, there's something else we need to discuss. Jessica's lawsuit. What about it? I'm not going to settle. I'm going to fight it in court, and I'm going to make sure that every detail of her involvement in your gambling addiction becomes public record." "Mom, are you sure? This could destroy her reputation." "David, Jessica destroyed her own reputation when she chose to help you steal from me and then tried to profit from the situation twice, once by access to family money and again by suing us when that access was removed. I'm simply ensuring that the consequences match the behavior." "What do you need from me?" "I need you to tell the truth, David. All of it. In court, under oath, regardless of how it makes you look or how it affects people you care about. Even if it means admitting that I was stealing from you to fund gambling addiction, especially if it means that. David, the truth is going to come out anyway. The question is whether you're going to be someone who takes responsibility for his actions or someone who tries to minimize and excuse them." As I hung up the phone, I realized that David had just passed the most important test of his recovery program. He was ready to tell the truth publicly, completely, and without trying to protect himself from the consequences. Margaret Harrison had spent 2 months orchestrating the comprehensive transformation of her family dynamics. Now she was about to demonstrate that accountability applies to everyone, including young women who think they can manipulate, steal, and sue their way to financial security. Jessica had made the mistake of underestimating not just David's capacity for honesty, but his mother's capacity for strategic warfare. She was about to learn that when you come for the Harrison family, you better come with more than tabloid articles and frivolous lawsuits, because Margaret Harrison hadn't built a fortune by backing down from bullies. The Manhattan courthouse was packed on the morning of Jessica's lawsuit hearing. What had started as a family drama had evolved into a legal spectacle that attracted journalists, legal scholars, and anyone interested in watching a masterclass in strategic litigation. Jessica's attorney, Bradley Thornton, expensive, aggressive, and clearly convinced he was representing a sympathetic victim, opened with a presentation that was both polished and completely miscalculated. Your Honor, my client Jessica Martinez is a young woman who was psychologically and financially abused by the Harrison family's systematic manipulation of her relationship with David Harrison. She was promised marriage into a wealthy family, made financial commitments based on those promises, and then subjected to humiliating financial restrictions designed to force her out of the relationship. I watched from the plaintiff's section as Thornton painted Jessica as an innocent victim of my controlling behavior and David's inherited financial instability. His strategy was clear: portray me as a manipulative matriarch who had destroyed his client's future for personal satisfaction. When James Morrison stood to present our defense, the entire tone of the courtroom shifted. Your Honor, the plaintiff's case rests on a fundamental misunderstanding of both the facts and the law. Jessica Martinez is not a victim of the Harrison family. She is a willing participant in a criminal conspiracy who is now attempting to profit from her own illegal behavior. James methodically presented the evidence: bank records showing David's systematic theft, credit card applications Jessica had signed to facilitate his gambling, email communications between Jessica and David discussing how to hide the gambling losses from me, and most damaging of all, recorded phone conversations between Jessica and her friends discussing her strategy to lock down David's inheritance before his mother figures out what's happening. The recordings were devastating. In Jessica's own voice, describing David as her meal ticket and discussing her plan to marry him quickly before his gambling problems became too expensive to manage. But the moment that ended Jessica's case came when James played a recording from 3 days before David signed the accountability agreement, a conversation between Jessica and her sister that David had unknowingly captured on his phone's voice memo app. I love David, but I'm not signing up to be poor, Jessica's voice filled the courtroom. His mother controls everything, and if she decides to cut him off, I'm not going down with that ship. I need to figure out how to protect myself financially before this whole thing collapses. What if he gets help for the gambling? Help means restrictions, monitoring, behavioral requirements. Do you know what that would do to our social life? I'd rather find someone whose family money comes without strings attached. The judge's expression said everything. Jessica hadn't just lost her case. She had lost any claim to moral high ground. When it came time for David to testify, I held my breath. This was the ultimate test of his recovery and his commitment to honesty, regardless of personal cost. David took the oath and looked directly at Jessica's attorney. Mr. Thornton, I want to be absolutely clear about something. Jessica didn't discover my gambling addiction. She helped create and maintain it. She took out credit cards specifically to fund my betting. She helped me create false documentation to hide losses from my mother. And she participated in planning a marriage strategy designed to gain access to family assets before my mother could implement financial oversight. Thornton tried to object, but David continued with the calm precision of someone who had finally decided to tell the complete truth. Jessica knew I was stealing from my mother for over a year. Not only did she not discourage it, she helped me calculate how much I could take without triggering an investigation. We discussed the theft explicitly and repeatedly. Mr. Harrison, isn't it possible that Ms. Martinez was simply trying to help you through a difficult period? David looked at Jessica for the first time during his testimony, and his expression was one of profound sadness rather than anger. Mr. Thornton, Helping someone through a difficult period means encouraging them to seek treatment, to confess their problems, to take responsibility for their actions. Jessica encouraged me to steal more money, to hide my behavior more effectively, and to manipulate my mother's trust more completely. That's not help. That's enabling criminal behavior for personal profit. The cross-examination lasted 3 hours, but David never wavered, never minimized his own responsibility, and never tried to protect Jessica from the consequences of her choices. When Jessica herself took the stand, her testimony was a disaster. Under oath, she couldn't maintain the fiction that she had been an innocent victim. James Morrison destroyed her credibility systematically, forcing her to admit that she had known about the theft, that she had participated in hiding it, and that she had broken off the engagement specifically because of the financial restrictions rather than concern for David's well-being. But the moment that secured our victory came when James asked Jessica about her post-breakup behavior. Ms. Martinez, after you ended your engagement to David Harrison, did you contact any journalists about the Harrison family's private affairs? I may have talked to some people. People like Amanda Stevens at the New York Post? I don't remember specifically. James produced phone records showing multiple calls between Jessica and the Post reporter, along with text messages where Jessica provided specific details about David's treatment program and my financial restrictions. Ms. Martinez, did you receive compensation for providing this information to the media? Jessica's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The judge allowed the question, and Jessica's hesitation before answering told the entire story. I received a small payment for my time. How small? $5,000. The courtroom erupted. Jessica had not only participated in David's theft and tried to sue us for damages, she had also sold our private family information to tabloid journalists for profit. When the judge rendered his verdict, his language was unusually harsh. This court finds that the plaintiff, Jessica Martinez, has failed to demonstrate any valid claim for damages. Furthermore, the evidence clearly shows that Ms. Martinez was not a victim of the defendant's actions, but rather a willing participant in fraudulent behavior who is attempting to use the legal system to profit from her own misconduct. The court awards summary judgment to the defendants and orders the plaintiff to pay all legal fees and court costs. Additionally, this court is referring the evidence of Ms. Martinez's participation in financial fraud to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. As we left the courthouse, reporters surrounded us with questions. But instead of hiding or offering no comment, I decided to make one final statement. Today's verdict demonstrates something important. Accountability applies to everyone. My son made serious mistakes, and he's working hard to earn back the trust he violated. But Jessica Martinez made the choice to profit from those mistakes rather than help solve them. The court has now ensured that choice has appropriate consequences. Mrs. Harrison, do you regret the way you handled your son's addiction? I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret refusing to enable destructive behavior. Real love sometimes means allowing people to face the consequences of their choices while providing them with the tools to make better ones. That evening, David and I had dinner together at a small restaurant near his apartment, the first meal we had shared in public since his recovery program began. Mom, I want to apologize for putting you through all of this. The theft, the lies, the lawsuit, the media attention. You didn't deserve any of it. David, you're not responsible for Jessica's choices. You're only responsible for your own. But I created the situation that made all of this possible. And now you're creating the solution. David, 6 months ago you were stealing from me and lying about everything in your life. Tonight, you testified under oath about your mistakes without trying to minimize or excuse them. That's not the same person. Do you think I can actually change, like fundamentally? David, you already have changed. The question is whether you can maintain the changes when life gets complicated again. What do you mean? I mean that recovery isn't just about stopping destructive behavior. It's about building the kind of character that makes destructive behavior unthinkable. As we walked through Manhattan that night, I realized that Margaret Harrison had accomplished something unprecedented. She had turned a family crisis into a comprehensive education in accountability, consequences, and the difference between enabling and loving. David had lost his fiancée, his financial safety net, and his illusions about himself. But he had gained something more valuable: the capacity to tell the truth, take responsibility, and build relationships based on honesty rather than transaction. And Jessica had learned that underestimating the Harrison family was the most expensive mistake she could have made. But more than victory, what I felt was hope. Real, sustainable hope that my son was finally becoming the man I had always believed he could be. 1 year later, I was standing in the same kitchen where David had first dismissed me with, "It's just a dinner, Mom," but everything had changed. The morning light streamed through windows that now felt like portals to possibility rather than reminders of what I had lost. David arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, carrying coffee from the small cafe near his new apartment and a folder of documents I had requested. But more than that, he carried himself differently. Shoulders straight, eyes clear, with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced his worst self and emerged intact. "Mom, here are the financial reports you asked for. 6 months of complete transparency, as promised." I reviewed the documents with the same attention I had once given to merger agreements. David's salary as a public defender was exactly what he had declared: $68,000 annually, barely a third of what he had made at the prestigious firm he had left 4 months earlier. But more importantly, every penny was accounted for, every expense justified, every financial decision made with the deliberate care of someone who understood the true cost of money. "David, your savings rate is remarkable. How are you managing to put away 20% of your income on a public defender's salary? It's amazing what you can save when you're not gambling it away or trying to impress people who don't actually care about you." He smiled, the first genuinely relaxed smile I had seen from him in years. "Also, it turns out I actually enjoy cooking my own meals and reading books instead of going to expensive restaurants every night. And the work, are you finding it satisfying?" "Mom, I love it. Yesterday, I helped a single mother avoid eviction because her landlord was illegally raising her rent. Last week, I got charges dropped against a teenager who was arrested for something he didn't do. I come home exhausted but proud of what I accomplished." This was the David I had raised, the boy who had wanted to help people who couldn't afford good lawyers. But this was also a new David, tempered by consequence and strengthened by accountability. "Have you heard anything from Jessica? She called 3 months ago. She's engaged to someone else now, a hedge fund manager she met at some charity event. She wanted to clear the air between us." And how did that conversation go? I wished her well and told her I hoped she had learned something from our experience together. She said she hoped I had learned not to let my mother control my relationships. I raised an eyebrow. "And your response?" I told her that my mother had never controlled my relationship with her. My mother had simply refused to subsidize it. There's a difference. Perfect. David had developed the ability to distinguish between boundaries and control, between consequences and manipulation. "David, there's something I want to discuss with you. About your inheritance." His face grew serious, but not panicked. A year ago, any mention of inheritance would have sent him into calculations about access and timing. Now he simply waited to hear what I had to say. "The Accountability Trust has served its purpose. You've completed the gambling addiction program, maintained employment in good standing, demonstrated financial responsibility, and rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty. I'm ready to dissolve the restrictions." What does that mean? It means that your inheritance is restored to its original status. No monitoring, no behavioral requirements, no oversight. David was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "Mom, I want to ask you something, and I want you to give me an honest answer." "Of course. Do you think I'm ready for that level of financial access? Because I'm not sure I am." This was the answer I had been hoping for, but hadn't dared to expect. David was now capable of self-assessment and self-protection, of recognizing his own vulnerabilities and managing them responsibly. "What would make you feel more confident about managing inherited wealth?" "I'd like to keep some of the reporting requirements in place voluntarily. Not because you're requiring it, but because I've learned that transparency keeps me honest with myself, and I'd like to continue working with the financial counselor. Having someone help me make decisions based on values rather than impulses has been incredibly helpful. David, I'm proud of you." "For what?" "For becoming someone who chooses accountability rather than having it imposed on you." We spent the rest of the morning reviewing investment strategies, charitable giving options, and long-term financial planning. But this conversation felt completely different from our previous financial discussions. Instead of David asking what he could access or when restrictions would be lifted, we were planning together how to build and protect family wealth for future generations. Mom, there's something else I want to discuss with you. About dating. Oh? I've been seeing someone. Her name is Sarah, and she's a teacher at a public school in Brooklyn. She has no idea about family money, doesn't know about my gambling history, and seems to like me for reasons that have nothing to do with what I can provide for her. How long have you been dating? 4 months. I wanted to make sure it was serious before I introduced any complications about family wealth or my recovery process. And you think it's serious now? I think I'm in love with someone for the first time in my adult life. Not with the idea of being in love, not with what a relationship could do for my image or status, but with an actual person who challenges me to be better. What does she know about your past? Everything. I told her about the gambling addiction, about stealing from you, about the lawsuit, about Jessica, all of it. And her response? She said she was proud of me for getting help and rebuilding my relationship with my family. She said the fact that I was willing to face consequences and change my behavior told her more about my character than any mistake I had made in the past. This was exactly what I had hoped recovery would bring David. The ability to be honest with people from the beginning, to build relationships on authenticity rather than pretense. When do I get to meet her? Actually, she's coming to dinner next Sunday, if that's okay with you. David, I would love to meet someone who appreciates the man you've become. That afternoon, as David prepared to leave, he turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a child. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. Do you forgive me? Not just for the money, but for all of it. For excluding you, for lying to you, for making you feel like you didn't matter to me. I looked at my son, this man who had stolen from me, lied to me, and excluded me from the most important moments of his life, but who had also found the courage to face his worst impulses and rebuild himself from the foundation up. David, I forgave you the night you signed the accountability agreement. Everything since then has just been proof that my forgiveness was justified. I love you, Mom. I love you too, David, and I'm proud of the man you've chosen to become. After he left, I walked out onto my terrace overlooking Central Park and thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 18 months ago, I had been dismissed as an inconvenient mother whose feelings didn't matter. 6 months ago, I had discovered that my son was a thief and a liar who was planning to defraud me systematically. But today, I had breakfast with a man of integrity who chose accountability over convenience, who valued honest work over easy money, and who was building relationships based on authenticity rather than transaction. Margaret Harrison had spent her career orchestrating corporate turnarounds, but this had been her masterpiece, the comprehensive rehabilitation of her family's values and relationships. The selfie I posted that evening showed me on my terrace at sunset, holding a glass of champagne with the lights of Manhattan twinkling behind me. But the caption was what mattered. 1 year ago, I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable the people you care about to destroy themselves. Today, I learned that when you set boundaries with love, maintain them with consistency, and enforce them with consequences, people you thought were lost can find their way back to who they were meant to be. Accountability, havras, real love, avraus, second chances, family, recovery, never give up. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of comments from people sharing their own stories of family addiction, financial abuse, and the difficult choice between enabling and loving. Messages from parents who had implemented similar accountability structures. Notes from adult children who thanked me for showing them what real consequences looked like. But the comment that meant the most came from David himself. Thank you for loving me enough to stop me. Thank you for seeing who I could become when I had forgotten who I was. Thank you for being the mother I needed, not the mother I wanted. I love you. Margaret Harrison had begun this journey as a dismissed mother whose son thought she was inconvenient. She was ending it as the architect of one of the most successful family interventions ever implemented. Sometimes the best way to save someone is to stop trying to save them and start requiring them to save themselves. And sometimes, when you refuse to be anyone's victim, you discover that you were always stronger than everyone around you realized, including yourself.